Welcome back to Fleshing It Out with Samantha Spittle, the introvert's extrovert. I'm excited for today. We're starting a new format. We're going to try doing a shorter episode called The Pit Stop, followed by the after show, or better known as the full flush. And so this allows us to kind of jump into some of the tips, the nuggets, the information kind of we want to share, and then we can kind of unpack it more in the after show. Of all the episodes to start this new format, I couldn't have picked a better episode. It's the episode, guys. This is the sex episode. So there's words that come out of my mouth that I never thought I would be saying on a podcast outside of conversations with my friends or my husband. But since I always say podcasts are a place for honesty with appropriate boundaries, we're doing it, guys. So we're talking about stuff, the hope, the reason for sharing, hopefully it's conversations that need to get started. And since we're all about sparking connections, igniting conversations, that's what we're doing. So buckle up, join us for the pit stop, but I definitely recommend sticking around for the full flush if you really want to hear some immature giggles and things like that, but also some real conversation because we're a little bit more guarded during the pit stop. It was new, and by the time the full flush rolled around, loosened up. Jeremy joined the conversation and had some more real talk and more tips and advice from other people. So stick around. You're on this journey with us, you guys, because this is totally outside of my comfort zone. And so just bear with us. This is the first one. And so enjoy. I hope that it's productive for you. And yeah, get on in here. Let's do this. And if not, just hit stop and come back next week.
Coming to you from the M&M Exterior Studio in Nooksville, Virginia, this is Flushing It Out with Samantha Spittle, the introvert's extrovert. She talks to people so you don't have to. For now.
Welcome back to Fleshing It Out with Samantha Spittle, the introvert's extrovert. I am talking to people so you don't have to, and especially today's episode. I'm with my good friend, Jenn Perrius, and she is a wife. Well, actually, no, first, welcome, Jenn.
Hi, thanks.
Thanks for coming.
Kind of made it sound like no one wants to talk to me personally.
Oh, I know. I'm sorry about that. Oh, gosh, no, that's not true at all. I just meant the topic that we're talking about is something that people don't always want to talk about, but you and I always have good discussions. So,
agreed.
So I knew, okay, I'm talking to people, I'm having discussions. I definitely want to talk to Jenn. She's a wealth of knowledge. She has so many different areas of life experience and expertise. So I was like, I know we'll have an amazing discussion. So as I said, she's a wife. She's a mom to 5 kids. She's a business owner. She's a CF mom, cystic fibrosis mom. She's a mom to cystic fibrosis. She's done foster care. She's adopted. She's raised amazing kids. Great, just so many good things. So I was like, man, she's a wealth of knowledge. Let's do a podcast. And so she came back to me. And Jenn, when I texted you the other night, what did you write back to me?
You're like, do you want to talk about parenting, mother, like all of these like topics? I was like, those are great, but maybe we should talk about sex. I feel like we should talk about sex.
So, when you have those friends that call you out?
Yep.
You are that for me because I'm like, oh, what's the vision of my podcast? Like, I want to talk about stuff like the poop story, the shame and the guilt. And I don't want women to feel that way. And so here I am like waving this flag of like wanting people, men and women, all of us to feel connected and seen. And then you tell me it's sex and I'm like, yes, awesome.
Cool.
Because this is in my real life every day, because as I said, we're girlfriends. When we all get together, I mean, this comes up a lot, and I feel like we have very good discussions, but I say you call my bluff because it was like, shoot, on the podcast? Like,
for all the world to hear.
But then if I'm being real, and as I always say, podcasts are a place for honesty. I mean, this is real life, and we need to talk about it. So
I'm happy to talk about foster care, business ownership later.
Yeah, we can have you come back for that, but we're going to start scratching the surface. So I'm excited to have you here today. We're kicking off your episode, whole new format. So we've got the pit stop, which is the 30-minute quick. We're going to go through kind of the top, the main nuggets of information and things like that. And
we can call it a quickie.
A quickie. Oh, yes. It'll normally be called a pit stop, but today's episode is a quickie. Good. Oh, man. See, this is why up top. This is why we're friends.
Yep.
So today's quickie is going to be the 30-minute episode. And then, basically it's like, if you like what you hear, stick around. We're going to keep the lives hot and continue the conversation. We might get our sound editor, aka my husband, Jeremy, to chime in and basically just dive deeper into, the things we talk about. I've also done some market research, crowdsourcing. And so I think we'll also have some fun things to share during the bonus episode. So
awesome.
Thanks for jumping in for this new format. So I guess why don't you start? I kind of introduced you, but maybe why don't you start why were you willing to go there? Because I said, if you're willing to go there, I'm willing to go there. So why are you willing to go there?
I think because just like motherhood and parenting and all the things that we all talk about all the time and struggle with and our relationships and all of that, I feel like this is the one thing that isn't necessarily always on the table for discussion, yet in my own relationship has been the topic of discussion and probably part of the highs and lows of our arguments and things like that. So it seemed just as valuable, if not maybe more valuable, than talking about how I got my 2-year-old to poop on the potty. Yes. So yes, there's value to that.
For sure. Which we'll cover at another time. Yeah,
absolutely.
For sure.
And I feel like, not that I'm an expert or that anybody should do what we did, but I would say maybe we got here, hindsight is 20/20, and we've been together for our whole lives and felt like I had all of that time to look back with the same person through various stages of life. So we were not, we've been together since we were 16 years old. So in a relationship through teenagers and newlyweds,
young newlyweds,
married,
young
babies,
parents,
exactly. The hard times, the good times, teenagers, babies, all of that. So I feel like we've, but this has always been something that has been in the forefront of our relationship.
And I think that's true for most people. And because it's not talked about, everyone thinks it's just our issue. It's just me. Right. Or it's just him and it's just us and whatnot versus, and I think too, a lot of times in conservative or religious circles as well, it's kind of oh, we don't talk about that, but it's it's a huge part of marriage, and so I'm excited to dive into it today. I wanted to give the disclaimer because the podcast is kind of just talking to people, that this is in the context or through the lens of our own experiences or, friends or people we've talked to, tips and things we've learned along the way. And so I feel like as always, I feel like it's always just scratching the surface. Yeah. And so my goal kind of with the whole podcast is to inspire people to get the conversations going in their own life. And so whether it's with their spouse, we'll talk about that. The communication is so important, but also just being willing to open up in a safe, trusted, boundary appropriate place.
Yes. I did get permission from Josh to
that is
say,
important to note.
Some things that might seem like oversharing. Those things I thought, well, maybe I will tell this story or this, that, and the other thing. I ran that all by him yesterday.
Very good to point out.
So we're good.
That's good to point out for the listeners because with doing some storytelling stuff that I'm working on, it's listeners, you kind of need to let them know how to feel about the situation. So for example, when I talk about shitting my pants, you guys, I'm totally cool with talking about it. And you asked me earlier, wait, you talk about that, but you feel uncomfortable with sex stuff? I'm yeah, exactly.
Yep.
We all have our thing. So I'm glad you pointed that out so that there's the freedom for all of us to okay, let's just not take this too seriously. We're being respectful of boundaries, but we can also kind of go a little deeper.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's jump into some of what have you learned with this whole sex thing?
So I think we kind of learned that keeping our sex life healthy and important through trial and error and talking about it. I think talking about it through those stages of life has probably been the most important thing. When we weren't talking about it and we were younger and didn't realize that they are like, not that we didn't have sex, but we weren't necessarily discussing it.
To make sure you're on the same
To make
page
sure
as
on the
far
same-
as your
exactly.
needs being met
Exactly.
and kind of the love tank being filled up type of thing, which
Exactly.
gets filled in different ways, not just with sex, but like that's
Right.
part of it.
Yeah.
So,
And I think it can, like, a good sex life can breed intimacy and closeness.
For sure.
And when it's not going well, it's such a quick divide
Yes.
that, and it's a slippery slope, and you can be like great partners and great parents and good friends and still have this thing that seems like, oh, it's just sex, but when it's not happening, it's almost like more important than it is when it is happening. Because
yeah, that's a great
I
point.
feel like 6 months goes by and you're, or, whatever. And then
Yeah.
you're like, who even are you?
Yeah.
Not really 6 months. but-
So, yeah, well, I mean, it could. I mean, there's
be.
people who go years.
Yeah.
Like it's different. So the crazy cycle, I think it may have been in the Love Languages book, but so maybe a great way to kind of frame the conversation and to think about it so that everyone, because I use this term a lot, crazy cycle, and I assume that everyone knows what I'm talking about, but it's about how, by nature, and this isn't going to be true for every man and woman, but by nature, men typically like to feel respected. They want to feel respected, and women want to feel loved. And that when men aren't feeling respected, they don't want to give love in the ways women need it. And when women aren't feeling loved, they don't want to show respect. And then you get into this crazy cycle. And that also goes with sex, because I was writing down like, okay, feels disrespected. Well, then they don't want to show love or connect emotionally, which women, and like I said, this is stereotypically, it's not true for everyone.
Right.
But women, or one partner wants to feel connected emotionally. So if they're not feeling connected emotionally, they don't want to connect physically.
Right.
And then if the other one's not feeling connected physically, they don't want to connect emotionally. And it goes around, and it's just like the crazy cycle. It goes around and around. And I was thinking, someone mentioned yesterday that pain is a symptom of other things in the body. So if you have a pain, you have to get to the core of the symptom. And I feel like sex, as you said, it can be used as something really good, but it can also be the indicator that something is askew in the relationship.
Right.
And it might not be a sex thing. It's a symptom of something else.
Right.
So, anyway, I think that crazy cycle is kind of where people find themselves, and we go through in stages of life. So,
Yeah.
So,
and also sort of biologically, there's a cycle where women, in order to feel like your body releases chemicals that make you feel closer to a person after you have sex with them. But for women, they need to feel that like before sex, and for men, it happens after. But it bonds you.
Yeah.
So when you're not doing that, even biologically, we're sort of designed for intimacy.
Oh, yeah. And that's the part that I think it gets left out a lot, because it's always save sex for marriage.
Right.
So it becomes this bad thing where, you shouldn't do it. And so then when it's finally time to do it, it's like, wait, I just spent so much time thinking it was bad and I shouldn't do it. So how do I suddenly change my brain? It's kind of a complicated, depending on what your background is.
A little like off topic, on topic, talking to our teenagers about sex. That is the angle that I have taken, talking to my daughters and talking even to our son about sex before marriage. Like, I think it's so prevalent and in their culture, and it seems very casual. Even just, it just is. It just is casual for very young kids.
Yeah.
But for them to realize that you will be emotionally affected regardless of how casual you think you're going to be.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's for another day. But
But
yes, it bonds you for sure.
So so we've touched upon the crazy cycle.
Yeah.
So whether you're there or not, because I would say your tips probably come from results of being in the crazy cycle.
Yes.
So how can we start tackling that, or kind of what's the first view of sex and marriage?
So I think sex is a great equalizer. And so if you are committed to whatever good sex looks like to you and your partner, then you make that a priority. Just like regardless of how difficult times have been, if you're committed to staying married, you work through those things. So if you are committed to having a healthy sex life, then you're less likely to be mad about the little things, and you let those things go. And then also you just are happier and more content. And I think it just puts you on the same page. I mean, these seem like very like concrete things, but I mean, of course.
Well, I think throwing it out there, this is kind of one of those where, especially for me, I always want to be sensitive to where someone else is coming from. We all do. So it's hard for me to say things like, this is a priority. But from our experience,
sure,
that's why
I would say everything from my own learning experience. But I would say
yes. And that's why I give the disclaimer too, that like, if you have had abuse in your past, if you have issues around it, like that it's a whole different ballgame. Yeah. So counseling, therapy, things like that, like things aren't black and white, you know what I mean? And so it's kind of almost saying, I guess I always feel like I need to give that disclaimer that there's like a whole other, and we all have issues.
I'm talking about like 25 years of like 20 something years of a sexual relationship with the same person. Yeah. We have done a million things wrong and some things right. Yeah. So that's where I feel like I definitely don't want it to seem like I'm like, this is what you need to be doing. It's just like, no.
But I think making it a priority, that's like I said, that's why it's hard for me to sometimes say that concretely, because I always feel like, well, we all come from a different place. But
that's
like, true. Let's just say the overall though, it's such an important thing. Yes. And I guess that's why it's hard to talk about. Maybe I just kind of proved my own point with like, oh, I don't want to say this because I know, but like, okay, well, let's just kind of put that. We're just going to set that over here. We're not going to ignore it, but we're going to set it here.
In a relationship where everyone is feeling generally respected and appreciated, and you are in like the normal throes of life and kids and all of that. That's where this is coming from. Yes. And I've spent plenty of years in therapy and plenty of years in like dealing with a lot of things that definitely affected our sex life and my views about myself. And I can say 100% that even though I didn't go to therapy regarding sex, things I learned changed my view of sex.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think so it's not just a black and white issue. Yeah. You know, there's not like, oh, we're going to give these tips. It's like it's very layered. So I'm glad you brought that up, because, you know, I think that kind of goes through with making it a priority in your relationship. Yeah. And so what that looks like to you, it could be as simple as you make time for it. You make date nights, you make things like that. But it also could be, if there's some deep-seated issues, diving into that more, you know? So definitely making it a priority. All right. What's another thing?
Okay. So I feel like to make it a priority, some practical things have to happen per your relationship. So for us, something that we've decided, well, I'll say this one first, because this is like more about me. So say you go out on a date, you get a babysitter, you do the whole thing, you go out to eat, you have a few drinks, and then you come home and no one wants to have sex because you ate a big steak and everybody has to poop and like, and you're like, we'll just do it another day. So on occasion, I have done my best to try and maybe do it before, because that sort of like, that's like the cherry on the date Sunday, right? Yeah. So if you've done it and you've done it happily and it was fun, then the whole date is enjoyable, and it doesn't feel like, oh, but we just, we just went to bed.
Yeah. And it takes, I think, for some too, the pressure off. Like,
for sure.
His needs, hopefully both your needs are met. And then you kind of don't have to worry, oh my gosh, am I going to be tired when we get home? Am I going to, or the kid's going to wake up? Like, if you have that window of time, then.
Exactly. So that's been like a practical thing that I think is helpful, is recognizing where you are in life and recognizing who you are. Yes. Like, I'm not coming home, and if I have some wine, it's done. It's done.
That kind of comes down to the communication, because one thing I heard over and over from women and men too, but it may not be the most comfortable conversation to have, but needing to talk about it. So you're not just in that crazy cycle. Because if you kind of each share what your struggles are, you can kind of work on, well, let's make time for this before we go to, the dinner, or let's, kids are, either at sports or taking naps or watching TV, you kind of can squeeze it in here and there. Because it's not always like the movies where it's
It's
right?
really not. It's really not like that at all. I think, yeah. So something else that we do, and again, well, I also think that just like talking about it was not super comfortable for me in the beginning because it was asking me to be very open and honest and transparent with things I wasn't even sure I knew how I felt about. So we would have conversations, and a lot of times I was like, I don't know what I think about that.
Yeah.
I need a little bit of time, and I need like maybe not. I'm not sure. And taking some time and figuring it out. So talking about your sexual relationship kind of ad nauseum was.
I got a great tip from someone about it because I asked how to talk about it because it sounds great in theory, but speaking from my own experience, and I know from others because I've talked to people about it, is it's very easy to get defensive.
Sure.
In that conversation. Well, you do this, so therefore blah, blah, blah. Or, and so it's kind of the whole, they said, one, do not have the conversation about sex in bed naked.
True.
That this needs to be something where you're removed, where you're already having nice feelings, maybe having a morning cup of coffee together and kind of like, hey, let's kind of approach this with kid gloves, but not in the moment. And especially if like one party's not feeling it, one is. And then suddenly you're having a discussion about it. And then there's defense, anger, shame, guilt, all that kind of stuff. So I loved that, I'd gotten that tip from someone about kind of when to have the conversation because it's easy to give the tip of, oh, talk about it. Well, how though? Because it can go downhill. It can go south quickly.
And because we're wired how we're wired, some of those conversations are difficult because you might not feel 100% concrete in one way or the other. And it's gray. And you have to like figure that out for yourself a little bit and be like, well, it's not rational that I feel this way, but or whatever it is. But I think we used to do a breakfast date.
I like breakfast dates.
Breakfast date was like, let's not talk about schedule and kids and blah, blah, blah. Let's talk about us. And that was a good catalyst for some of that conversation.
Nice.
He'd ask a question. Sometimes he'd ask a question like right at the end. And I was like, to be continued. Let me.
That would have been good at the beginning.
Yeah. I'm going to chew on that for a little bit.
I'm going to go through that.
Yes. I can give you a really great example of when we were younger and we weren't necessarily talking about sex all the time. But we were having sex and we had a couple of small children, maybe 3 kids, like 2, 3 and baby. I don't know. There was like.
They were super young.
Yeah, they were little for sure. So we were young and we were in the throes of passion as you are with 3 babies in your house. Not really. We were,
they were asleep.
Yeah, they were asleep. We were doing it.
Yeah. Let's just say it.
Yeah, that's what's happening. And
we were having sex.
We were having the sex. And I thought that he like tugged my hair. And I was like, oh, well, that's new. That's weird.
Okay.
All right. We're doing that now. Okay. And I guess I made like a little noise. Ow. Yeah. I probably was like, ow, what the heck are you doing? So he took that noise to mean that I liked that. And so he totally proceeded to pull harder.
Oh, gosh.
And I'm like, ah. And then he's like, oh, do you like that? And I'm like, well, do you like that? And now we're like talking about that while the other person is thinking that the other person likes that.
If you like
while
it.
we're having sex, if you like it, it's okay.
Yeah.
And then I started crying. And so when he realized that I was crying, he was like, something isn't right.
Isn't that abort?
Yeah,
abort.
Exactly. So he's like, why are you crying? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. He's like, am I hurting you? I'm like, well, no, but I realized that I was sad that he liked hurting me.
Oh, no.
So I was like, you want to hurt me?
Oh,
and
no.
He's like, no. He's like,
oh,
this is so weird. My finger got caught in your hair and it was an accident. I was like,
but then I thought you liked it.
Then I thought you liked it.
Oh,
so
God.
had we known beforehand that we either did or did not like hair pulling.
Which nothing wrong if you do, but
no, it
good
just wasn't
to
for
know.
me. I was like, why
so you don't
wanna
end up
hurt me?
crying.
Yeah, crying during sex is not recommended. Maybe
It happens, I'm sure, but
Yes.
So note to self, not into hair
So
pulling.
there's my poop. That's my poop gate story.
That's your poop story. That's your version
Yes.
of what you learned,
Yep.
what that story taught you, and you're willing to share it
Yep.
because you were like, dang, had I not experienced
Yes.
that.
I
We
would-
just, you could be 20 years into marriage with hair pulling every night.
Exactly.
Or not every
Maybe
night,
I would
but-
just have a pixie cut to avoid it. I just go with avoidance for
like, I like short hair.
short hair. He's like, that's weird.
That's weird. She
Yeah.
always cuts her hair so short. So when we get into the full flush, we're going to dive into some of this more,
Yeah.
but to wrap up some of your tips. So definitely prioritizing sex. And I think taking away the stigma that it is okay to talk about it.
Yes.
It's okay to prioritize it. What is one thing you've found if you are going through a difficult time and to kind of work through things? What
Yeah.
are some tips that you've had with that?
So I think something we've decided, and this is not like a end all and be all, because like I said, we've been together like forever, but we have decided that we are not going to masturbate alone
Mhm.
and have that be an easy, that's like an easy way out, right? So you're, again, sort of biologically driven to want to have sex. And then
Mhm.
if it's just easier to take care of it yourself because
Mhm.
having sex is not convenient, or one of you doesn't want to do it
Mhm.
when the other person wants to do it, then yes, it is simpler, but then you have one less thing driving you together.
Yeah.
And I feel like when you're in these particular stages of life,
Mhm.
you need all the help you can get.
Yeah.
So if he's taking care of business on his own a couple times a week,
Mhm.
then he's less likely, if he knows he's going to get shot down, he's
Yeah.
more likely to do that and less likely to put moves on me, which
Yeah.
inevitably make me, if he's wanting to have sex with me, then I feel desired and
Yeah.
loved and
It's the
attended
good
to.
cycle. It's
Exactly.
you are feeling loved, so then you want to feel physical, and then he feels
Right.
filled up, and then it's the good cycle.
Yeah. That's exactly it. So being committed to that has helped bring us together. Even sometimes if I'm sick or kids are sick or
Yeah.
a lot of time goes by, it's kind of like, let's talk about this, because if we really aren't going to be able to take care of this
Mm-hmm.
and make time for us, let's maybe have a hiatus,
Mm-hmm.
take care of things and come back together. Like,
Mm-hmm.
should we do that? Shouldn't we do it? And then we're like,
Yeah.
usually you're like, all right, no, it really just takes like a few minutes. So we can just,
Yeah.
yeah, but it makes you realize that that is a choice that we
Yeah.
all face daily. You can do that, even sort of like porn aside, and
Yeah,
all the things that comes with, but
Yeah.
just the idea that even chemically and biologically, you want to be intimate with your partner,
Yeah.
and that helps.
I love discussing this, even though it's like, okay, out of my comfort zone, because it's one of those things that if you are just on a blog and you're looking at like tips and it's just written, it's like it might not pertain to your exact situation.
Right.
But I like talking about it and hearing your perspective, because it's like, yes, if you're in a committed, healthy relationship and your goal is to drive each other closer, then this tip could be a game changer, because you realize, oh, I wasn't wanting to work on this because my needs were being met outside. So
Right.
I kind of like that. And then wrapping up just the tips for our pit stop, or rather our quickie today. It's kind of a big one, but what about the different seasons of life? Because you've gone teenage years, newlyweds, babies, 5 kids.
Yeah.
So much, because I know I can speak for myself, but to make it less awkward, just every pretty much mom, you and I were talking about this, that when you're touched all day long, it's a game changer. And but then it doesn't stop, because then when they're older, it's emotional.
Yes.
So it's like, oh my gosh. And then if you don't have kids, it's work. It could be work,
Whatever
there's
the stress
there's
is,
always
right?
something. So how have you kind of worked through the seasons of life?
Yeah. I think, there's always something, right? And so we've been, I don't know, sorry, friends, sorry, grandpa. We've been having sex since before we were married. So a lot of times I felt like I can't keep up with 17-year-old me.
No responsibilities.
Yeah, it was fine. Lots of pre-therapy.
Yeah.
Lots of issues.
Lots of compensation. Just really
Exactly.
going at it.
Just, yeah. Sorry, kids.
We'll put an explicit on
Yeah.
this.
I just realized just now that there's the potential for my children to hear this. So Well, they know how they were made.
I was actually going to ask you about that, but I thought, well, I'm sure you've thought that through. Dang it.
I have now. It's fine. That just goes to show you that my relationship with my husband is most important. No, I'm just kidding. But it is. But yeah. Awkward. Okay, so different stages of life. Okay. So newlyweds, I feel like personally being young, we were having lots of sex. We weren't really talking about it and everything seemed okay. Mm-hmm. Had we been talking about it, I feel like maybe it could have been better even because there were things we could have talked out different. With babies, when you're being touched all the time, that is true. You are like touch satisfied, if that makes sense. And then
overloaded.
And you just don't. Sure. But then, so then you're like, don't touch me. And then your husband feels rejected. And then, it's
and then they feel rejected, so then they don't do the little things that you need throughout the day, the little touches here and there. Exactly. So then you're getting more, well, you don't necessarily, it's all the love languages stuff. Yeah.
So you're not being fed emotionally, and then they're not being fed physically, which is often how they feel fed emotionally. And it is a vicious cycle for sure. So some of that is just, you kind of have to suck it up a little bit, both of you, because
it's getting off the crazy cycle. Because I remember reading about that. Like, so now we're talking about in the context of sex, but it's in which it actually in the crazy cycle with that book, it probably comes down to that too. But it's that one of you has to get off the cycle. Yeah. One of you has to say, okay, I'm pulling the plug. So like with women, we want to feel emotionally connected before, but if they're not feeling physically, so it gets to the point where one of you has to like, I hate the term man up. I mean, I use it, but it's like, I feel like, I don't know. You just woman up. I don't know, whatever. Yeah, like you, like, all right, commit to it and do it.
Because once you're like there, you're not mad you're there. It's just the idea of like, I just put a baby to bed.
I'm so tired.
I mean, there was like a long point where I was like nursing and pregnant at the same time. Like, if one more person touches me, I'm going to commit murder.
Yes,
and
I think that's hard for men to understand.
Oh, like, for sure.
So communicating that is important so that they know it's not them. It's like your state of mind.
But that's hard to hear. That's hard to understand. Like, because it comes with a lot of rejection. And his point to me often was like, imagine you said, I love you. And I was like,
I don't
like,
really.
I don't care. I love you. It just like.
I just don't feel like saying it.
I don't feel like saying it today. I don't feel like saying it for a week, whatever.
Yeah, however long.
And it is confusing too, because I feel like when you're baby cycle, your like hormones are up and down and all over the place. So I'm like, hey, let's do it right now. And then, but not for a while after that. And he's like, what the heck? I thought we were doing it all the time.
Yeah.
Like, I'm over it now.
Yeah, exactly. That was then. That was it now.
Yeah. Get with the program. So
keep up.
I think just, again, kind of like in hindsight, reading lots of books and doing lots of thinking about it, it would have been great to be, to know those things then. And then I think it's actually harder to have a good sex life when you have teenagers.
Yeah.
Emotionally draining. They're asshats more than they're not. And
love you guys.
Yes. They are awesome. So when they're wanting to have a really good relationship with them, they don't really, especially if they go to school, they don't open up until like 10 o'clock at night. So after school, it's still like friends, homework, feed me. They need to veg. How was school? Good. What'd you do? I don't remember. And I think that's true. Like they just are still processing their day.
Yeah.
And then someone comes and sits on the edge of your bed. And what are you going to be like? No, go away. Like it's time for, and sometimes it is like,
no, but that's where that's where our priorities come, where it's like, yes, our marriage, because we're talking about sex today, like, yes, that's a priority, but also being good parents that invest in our kids is a priority. So I think that's why it's so important, though, to have, like, these are the conversations that I feel like we as women have, but men don't have, or they're not privy to hearing it, which hopefully men, you're listening to the podcast to know what's going on in our brain, that we want to invest in our kids right now because we want them to have that emotional connection time. Yes. And we could say, no, time's up. You missed out on your opportunity to connect. Like that's just not realistic. So then it comes up to us. It's on us to say, okay, I need to figure out to prioritize my sex life. How can I make sure we prioritize it? Because this is infringing on maybe where we used to have it. So
yeah, you have to kind of adjust. And through those seasons of life, I feel like it looks different through each phase of family life. So for me, a little fly on the wall in our bedroom for how, we have almost all teenagers at this point and one little guy. And I work I teach dance, so I get home late. Our evening doesn't really start very early. So if I, by the time I get little one to bed and all of that, it's already 9:00. I'm already tired. So all I really want to do is put on my comfy jammies and pour a glass of wine and get in my bed and veg.
Yeah.
And then in comes the kid and you're like, cool. And then 2 hours later, you're like, oh my God, that was really emotionally scarring.
Oh.
And like, it's never anything light and easy.
Yes.
It's always something heavy most of the time. And then you need to decompress, or I need to decompress. And I think that's where some of our biggest arguments have happened, because I'm like, I need a breather between those two things.
I can't go from all in,
Yeah.
helping emotionally, to suddenly all in with a physical thing and not have my mind just be like, oh, I'm turning off.
Exactly. I'm like, I need to like watch The Daily Show or like do something to break up the monotony. So then trying really hard to maybe not pour a glass of wine. So that sacrifice means that I will not be so sleepy. And, even if it's really late, we've now met everybody's emotional need. And then I'll have a glass of wine after. and veg. So it's like talk, watch something mindless.
And I love what you said about it looks different to everyone, because that schedule, of course, I like that you shared that because it's a real world example, but I think it just comes down to prioritizing it. And so you have the different seasons of life. And so it's finding what works for you. So
you can't hurt it. It's not going to hurt anybody to talk about sex with your spouse. So what you like, how often is reasonable.
And that's different for everyone.
We've
talked about that because everyone always wants to know everyone's number. Like, what's the number? I need to know if we're normal. But it's like, I guess it's like the whole, like, well, where are you and your husband or your spouse? Because if you're a husband listening, where, or whatever relationship you're in, where are you happiest? Where are you not fighting about the dishwasher? Where are you not fighting about saying something wrong? Like,
and when are you not feeling like you have pressure?
Yeah.
Or you're feeling neglected, like, for both people to feel like I can't have sex every day. I can't, that's a lot of pressure for me.
Yeah.
Like
literally too.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
It's just like a lot of UTIs. But being realistic about that, like, okay, 7 days a week? No. Where are you comfortable? 3 days, whatever it is that makes both people happy, but talking about what you like, maybe talking about what you maybe used to like, but don't like anymore.
Yeah, that's true.
And like things change, your opinions change, your bodies change, like whatever it is.
Talk about it.
Talk about it. And
Well, thank you for being willing to open up and help us break the ice on this topic. I know we have so much more. So if you like what you heard here, stick around. I think we're going to have Jeremy weigh in for a little bit of a male perspective. I've gotten some tips from some educated people to spice things up, things to do to help. So we'll cover all that in the bonus episode so that we don't go on too many tangents, but I think there'll be a good amount of tangents. But there'll be
a tutorial.
No, I'm just kidding. We'll do a Facebook Live. But thank you, Jen. I appreciate you.
Thanks.
I appreciate you being such a good friend and just always willing to talk about the hard stuff together. Hard stuff.
Wait for the tips.
wait for the follow up for just the tips. All right. Well, thank you, Jen. I appreciate you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And that's a wrap for now.
Thanks for listening to Flushing It Out with Samantha Spittle. Music provided by twinmusicom.org. Song titled Night at the Dance Hall. Sound editing by me, Jeremy Spittle. A special thanks to our studio sponsor, M&M Exteriors. Visit their website at mmexteriors.com for all of your roofing, siding, and gutter needs in the Northern Virginia area. Visit our website at flushingitout.com and be sure to subscribe. This has been a Spitfire production.
That was the greatest thing I've ever heard.